Close your eyes for a second and just picture it. That iconic purple motorcycle, the ruffled shirts, the sheer electricity of First Avenue. Feel the rain. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Prince's Purple Rain.
Absolutely legendary.
Today, we're diving deep into the origins, the creation, and the lasting legacy of this absolute powerhouse project. You've shared some incredible source material with us, articles, biographical details, breakdowns of the music and the movie itself.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
Our mission in this deep dive is really to unpack all of it, pull out the key insights, understand how something this groundbreaking even came to be, the challenges Prince faced, and why decades later, it still hits us right in the gut.
Definitely. The sources really cover the whole journey, the idea, getting it made, the sound, filming, the soundtrack, release, the whole legacy.
So let's get into it. What do the sources tell us about where this whole Purple Rain idea even started?
Well, what's fascinating is that by the early 80s, Prince already had pop success, right? But he was aiming way beyond just that. The sources really highlight this core insight. Prince saw cinema not just as a way to sell records, but as a path to cultural immortality. He didn't just want a movie with music.
He wanted the music to be the movie.
Exactly. A daring kind of autobiographical musical where the songs were the narrative.
That was pretty audacious back then, wasn't it? Especially, black rock artists weren't headlining films, and music movies were often kind of, cheesy, disposable.
Totally. He envisioned something raw, deeply emotional, spiritual even, but also rebellious, visually striking. It was meant to blur the lines between his own tumultuous life and this fictionalized fantasy.
But getting Hollywood on board, that sounds like a struggle. The sources mention a lot of skepticism.
Oh, yeah, intense skepticism from studios. They thought he was too niche, maybe too edgy, too unconventional. He wasn't a traditional movie star.
And the story itself. A troubled musician battling his past, his bandmates, romance, not exactly standard Hollywood fare.
Right. The sources describe the pitch almost like Romeo and Juliet meets Rebel Without a Pause, but with synthesizers. Sounds cool now, but back then.
A big gamble.
Yeah.
So Warner Bros. Eventually took the leap. Mostly because they already had him on the record label side.
Pretty much. But it definitely came with strings attached. Big ones.
Like the budget.
Absolutely. A very tight $7 million, which meant no room for lavish sets or, big, expensive effects.
And the sources say there were no guarantees of a wide release either.
None. If it didn't perform well right out of the gate, that could have been it. For Warner Bros., it was a calculated risk on their star.
But for Prince, it sounds like it was more like destiny. A prophecy he was ready to fulfill.
He was ready, yeah.
So, okay, before the cameras rolled, what foundation had Prince built that even made this possible? Where did he come from?
Well, the sources trace it right back to Minneapolis. Music was literally in his blood. His dad was a jazz pianist, his mom a jazz singer. That legacy was huge, even with the difficult, kind of unstable home life the film touches on.
And that instability, maybe that pushed him towards music. Mastering instruments so young.
Yeah, he became this multi-instrumentalist perfectionist incredibly early. By his teens, he was already hustling in local bands, and his pitch to Warner Bros. As a teenager, it was crazy.
How so?
He wasn't just a singer. He told them he was a one-man creative force, could write, arrange, produce, play everything.
And they bought it. His early albums like Dirty Mind, Controversy, they showed he was unique.
Definitely. But 1999, that was the real game changer, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That double album was just a masterpiece of genre bending. It's like Little Red Corvette, Delirious. They crossed over big time.
And crucially, his charisma, his look, it helped break through on MTV, which was huge then, but often, resistant to black artists.
So the momentum was seriously building. And this is when he really solidified the revolution too, right?
Exactly. Initially forming with key players like Bobby Z, Lisa Coleman, Dr. Fink, Brown Mark. The sources describe this dynamic of intense creative lightning, especially live on stage.
But also pressure.
Yeah, mounting pressure as his fame just exploded. 1999, going multi-platinum meant he wasn't just rising anymore. He was a phenomenon. And he felt kind of boxed in by the pop star label. He wanted more.
And the sources mentioned hints of this personal story, this desire to tell it, even in the lyrics on 1999.
For sure. Tracks that talked about struggle, identity, yearning. He wasn't just writing songs. He was building this whole universe where pain, joy, sex, spirituality, it was all tangled up together.
The stage was definitely set to put that on screen.
And key to that whole world was the sound itself, the Minneapolis sound. What was that, based on the sources?
Right. So by the early 80s, this really distinct musical identity was coming out of Minneapolis, mostly shaped by Prince. The key insight is just how revolutionary it was. It defied categorization, didn't sound like anything else coming from the Midwest.
What were the ingredients? What made it so unique?
The sources always mention raw, tight, heavily electronic. Think minimalist drum machines that Lin LM1 gets name-checked a lot for that distinct snap, layered with these icy synths, really slinky, often distorted guitars, and sparse, super funky bass lines. And the vocals often layered high-pitched falsetto, carrying both vulnerability and, like, total swagger.
And it wasn't just the sound, it was the attitude.
Absolutely. Audacious, weird, totally fearless in mixing sex, spirituality, social rebellion, or background noise. It made you listen, dance, think, maybe feel a little uncomfortable sometimes.
And Prince didn't do it completely alone. He brought other artists into this world.
Like The Time. Who were the perfect rivals in the movie?
Definitely. Morris Day just embodying that pure comedic swagger. And groups like Vanity Six, later Apollonia Six, pushing boundaries around femininity, eroticism. Nasty Girl.
Yeah, these acts were like essential satellites in the Prince universe.
Yeah.
Distinct, but still rooted in that Minneapolis funk thing.
And behind the scenes, that core group of collaborators was crucial too.
Yes, the sources mention Wendy Melvoin, Lisa Coleman, Dr. Fink, Brown Mark, Bobby Z, engineer Susan Rogers, while Prince famously did a lot himself in the studio.
He knew he needed the band.
Exactly. He knew building the revolution and having these collaborators was vital for the live energy and, crucially, for translating it all into a movie. They weren't just backup, they were co-stars.
So this whole artistic universe, this love letter to the city and the sound, it was basically ready for its close-up.
Which brings us to actually getting it filmed. How did this complex dream finally become a real movie?
Well, even after 1999's massive success, Prince had more clout, but Hollywood was still kind of hesitant. The sources say they still weren't sure about his acting chops or if he had conventional star power.
But he kept pushing.
Total persistence. He wasn't taking no for an answer. He first worked with William Blinn on a script called Dreams, but apparently it wasn't quite hitting Prince's vision.
Yeah, maybe too conventional. Needed more grit.
Right. So the project went to a young director, Albert Magnoli. He reshaped it, made it leaner, moodier, closer to that raw energy Prince wanted. Danger, romance, fire.
And Warner Bros. Finally signed off on that $7 million gamble. The sources really emphasize how tight that budget was.
It dictated so much. Shoot fast, mostly on location. And Prince insisted, Minneapolis, it had to be Minneapolis. Not just practical, it was about authenticity, using real spots like First Avenue where he cut his teeth.
And casting the revolution as themselves added to that reality.
Yeah.
But the female lead, Apollonia, came in really late, didn't she?
She did. The role was meant for Vanity from Vanity Six, but she left right before shooting started. Sources describe this frantic scramble for a replacement.
And Apollonia Cotero landed it.
Yeah, an actress, model from LA, pretty unknown, limited musical background. But the sources say Prince saw something, a look, a chemistry. She had to transform fast, learn the songs, step into this huge role.
But their chemistry on screen,
Oh,
undeniable.
crucial.
Totally. And for the rival, the antagonist, Prince looked to Morris Day.
Perfect casting. Prince as the intense, brooding kid, Morris Day as this exaggerated, hilarious swagger machine. Sources say Day basically played a bigger version of himself.
Provided that crucial tension and humor.
And you can't talk Morris without Jerome Benton. Huh. No way. His sidekick, the physical comedy, scene stealer, that duo gave the film some much-needed lightness against the heavy stuff.
The sources also mentioned deliberately casting real Minneapolis musicians, plus veteran actors for the parents.
Yeah, reflecting Prince's own complicated family life. Clarence Williams III as the abusive father figure, Olga Carlatos as the mother. Super heavy roles drawn right from Prince's childhood, grounded the film's emotional core.
So cast, budget, location, set, then filming starts. What was it like behind the lens?
Sources say they kicked off in November '83, middle of a brutal Minneapolis winter. Director Magnoli went for this gritty, kinetic style, mixing music video energy with raw, emotional storytelling.
And First Avenue. That was the heart of it all.
Absolutely. Not just a set. It was like the movie's central nervous system. So many key performance scenes, Let's Go Crazy, Computer Blue, I Would Die For You, the big Purple Rain climax shot live. During actual Prince shows, real fans.
Well, with hidden cameras.
Yeah, trying to capture that authentic, raw electricity. The crowd wasn't just background, they were part of it, fueling the performances.
Must have been intense. Beyond the live shows, too. Blizzards, drama.
Totally intense. Battling the weather outside, navigating the drama inside, driven by the script, and just Prince's incredible focus. The domestic scenes, especially. Those sounded really tough.
Yeah, the sources mentioned how dark and draining those were.
Prince was drawing directly from his own experiences, witnessing stuff between his parents. There are stories of him needing to walk away after filming those scenes, just too close to home, too much trauma.
But that vulnerability, putting his own pain on screen, that's what gave it such power, arguably. And it was always music first, right? The songs led the story.
That's such a critical insight from the sources. It wasn't script, then songs. Prince basically handed Magnolia a cassette of rough tracks and said, here's the movie. The songs were the emotional blueprint.
When doves cry for the breakdown, Purple Rain for the release.
Exactly. And that final performance of Purple Rain sources confirm it was live, mostly one take. It wasn't just acting. It felt like this genuine emotional outpouring. You can hear the rawness, like he's almost choking up.
And they pulled all this off on that tight $7 million budget.
Meant shooting fast, lean crew. Costumes were often Prince's stage clothes. That was his actual motorcycle. No big effects. By the end, despite the limits, everyone felt they'd captured something powerful, something true to Prince.
Something uniquely Prince, okay? And then the album, which actually dropped before the movie.
Right, June 25, 1984, almost a month before the film. And the sources are clear. This wasn't just a tie-in. This was the main event, an era-defining masterpiece all on its own.
We got to touch on some key tracks. Let's Go Crazy kicks off the album and the film.
Yeah, total call to arms. That organ intro, the gospel sermon, immediate spiritual urgency mixed with rock and roll. And that guitar solo just announced his rock god status. Perfect opener. Huge hit.
And there's one that caused all the fuss. Darling Nikki.
Ah, yes. Infamous lyric. The sources confirm. This is the song that got Tipper Gore and the PMRC fired up, leading directly to those parental advisory stickers. Beyond that, though, it's this raw, minimalist track and that weird reversed message at the end.
And the biggest hit, totally unique for radio, When Doves Cry.
Man, where do you start? Sources marvel that Prince built it himself overnight, all instruments, all vocals, and famously, no bass line, unheard of for a funk hit. It was icy, mechanical, but gut-wrenching.
And the lyrics, Maybe I'm Just Like My Father, connects directly to the film's conflict.
Totally ties into the narrative core. It exploded precisely because it was so different. #1 for 5 weeks.
Just incredible. And then the title track, Purple Rain.
The magnum opus. Sources say it grew from a jam session with The Revolution. Wendy Melvoin played some chords, Prince responded, it just unfolded. Prince himself talked about Purple Rain symbolizing the end of the world, red for love passion, blue for sadness Spain, mixing to purple, transformation, healing.
The performance in the film wasn't just a concert scene.
It was meant as a spiritual event.
Yeah.
The album's legacy is just mind-blowing.
The numbers are staggering.
Over 25 million copies sold. 24 weeks straight at #1 in the U.S., won the Oscar for Best Original Song Score, a couple of Grammys. The key insight here, it wasn't just a soundtrack, it was the movie's heart. Changed everything for soundtracks.
The album's a phenomenon, building crazy anticipation.
Yeah.
Then the movie drops, July 27, 1984.
And the sources describe it like a shockwave. Audiences hadn't seen a star bare their soul like that on screen. The reaction was visceral cheering, laughing, gasping, crying in theaters.
Opening weekend was huge.
Massive. #1 debut, $7.7 million. Basically made its entire budget back in 3 days. For Warner Bros., gamble paid off. For Prince, validation, prophecy fulfilled. That audience connection was instant.
Critics were split, but many saw his magnetism. Ebert gave it 4 stars, called him an original.
Yeah, the sources kind of point out it wasn't really made for critics. It was made to connect with an audience hungry for something real, something boundary-breaking, and it absolutely did. Awards followed the Oscar, Prince's humble thank God speech, AMAs, Grammys. Purple Rain was locked into cultural history.
And the cultural shock went way beyond just the film and music.
Oh, absolutely. Prince became inescapable. His image, fashion, lyrics, sexuality, spirituality, everything was debated, dissected. He blurred lines, race, gender, genre, like few mainstream stars ever had. And crucially, he did it by showing his deepest vulnerabilities. Sources emphasize it showed people you could fight your demons, embrace pain, and still create something transcendent.
So let's talk aftermath, legacy. What happened after this purple storm?
Well, Prince being Prince, he didn't stand still. Sources mention he deliberately shifted gears with the next album, Around the World in a Day, just a year later. Totally psychedelic departure, refused to be boxed in by Purple Rain's success.
And the revolution. So key to Purple Rain.
The film definitely put them in the spotlight, showed their collaboration, especially Wendy and Lisa. But sources indicate tensions grew as Prince's fame and maybe his desire for creative control increased. By '86, that classic lineup was done. End of that golden age. Purple Rain, Around the World, Parade.
What about Apollonia? Thrown into the spotlight.
Became a household name overnight, did an album with Apollonia 6. But sources say it was tough once Prince moved on creatively, suddenly famous but without the long-term career foundation. Still, an iconic part of the story, Forever, the girl who jumped in the lake.
He did try to revisit that Purple Rain world later, though.
Yeah, Under the Cherry Moon was this artistic left turn, flopped commercially, but gave us the amazing Parade album and Kiss. Then Graffiti Bridge in '90 was meant as a direct sequel, but sources say it just lacked that raw, autobiographical magic of the original.
But Purple Rain's impact just kept growing over the years.
Absolutely. Added to the National Film Registry in 2019, culturally significant, the album's always ranked among the greatest. That guitar solo, legendary, new generations kept finding it.
And then, the loss. Prince passing in 2016.
Devastating. Sources describe this global grief. And Purple Rain, the film, the album, the song became central to mourning him. People rewatched it not just as a movie, but as his message. Struggle, beauty from pain, fighting demons through art. First Avenue became this huge memorial.
Forever Purple.
Yeah.
So what's the ultimate takeaway about his legacy?
The sources consistently point to its boundary-breaking power. Shattered expectations for genre, race, gender, how artists could mix vulnerability with spectacle. It created this blueprint for countless artists after him, gave him radical permission to be authentic, unconventional.
Not just showmanship or guitar solos, but blending performance and real storytelling fearlessly.
Exactly. And its place in cinema is huge too, bringing a complex, urban story to the mainstream, paving the way for other music films. First Avenue became a symbol. A Purple Rain isn't just history, it's still alive, still inspiring.
This deep dive really highlights that Purple Rain wasn't just a hit movie or album. It was this cultural phenomena, a unique convergence of Prince's genius, his personal story, and maybe destiny.
It's such a powerful reminder that art, born from vulnerability, can challenge, heal, and connect deeply across generations.
And perhaps, thinking about everything we've looked at from the sources today, the true, enduring legacy of Purple Rain isn't just the brilliant art or the massive success, but maybe it's that radical permission slip it offered. Permission for future generations to blend identities, defy expectations, and find their own transformation through being vulnerable. Something for you to definitely consider as you listen back to that incredible soundtrack.